Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor and we're going to be going over the blaster stance. So this is going to be my blaster stance guide. And so this one is one of the most unique, I guess, stances. It's definitely unique to the game. You don't really see a whole lot of Jedi utilizing a blaster as their secondary or part of their primary weapon. So it's definitely unique for that. As Obi-Wan would say, very uncivilized. But it is a pretty exciting new addition to this game that Jedi Fallen Order did not have. I think a lot of people adapt to it really quickly, or at least once they unlock it, I should say, it becomes one of their favorites. And so I experimented with it quite a lot. I think it's a decent enough stance. It certainly has very unique strengths that no other stance has, but it's also got weaknesses. So we're going to go over all of that stuff. One thing to note is that you do actually get this one relatively late in the game. You unlock the blaster stance at the end of your first trip to Jeddah. So I'm not really going to do any story spoilers, but basically you jump around different planets in this game quite a bit. You should know that if you've played it before. And at some point you make a trip to Jeddah, and when you finish that chunk of the story on Jeddah and you're ready to leave, that's when you will get your blaster and will unlock this stance. So, like I said, it's not one that you get as early in the game as the ones we've already talked about, but it's, you know, probably right around the halfway point. As far as information about the stance goes, obviously in the one hand you have the blaster, so that's not really any traditional Jedi stuff at all. But the rest of the stance, the stuff that you do with the saber, is actually most closely based on Form 2 Makashi, which is the saber dueling stance, most notably utilized by Count Dooku during the Clone Wars. So it's primarily going to be a lunging and stabbing form, which gives it a very unique vibe that none of the other stances in this game have. So if you really want to imitate Dooku, I mean, Dooku would never stoop to using a blaster in his offhand, but this is the form that gets you closest to Makashi, so that's interesting. Other than that, it is just, like I've already said, the most different stance of them all. There are no other stances in this game that feel as unique as the blaster stance because of the fact that you have a blaster in one hand and you're basically fencing in the other hand. It should be obvious that this stance is the best at long range, since it's the only one that can actually fire a blaster. The best you can do with any of the other stances is your saber throw, but the blaster obviously outreaches that by quite a bit. As far as style points go, which a lot of people care about more than anything, the blaster stance is obviously high on that regard, just because, you know, obviously it's the only one where you get to be a gunslinger. So for style points, this one is the way. There are only two cons that I have for this stance, and the first one is that it's, if not the hardest, it's the second hardest stance to actually learn to be very effective with, just because of how limiting the saber style itself is, and how limiting the usefulness of the blasters. So the blaster is super useful in certain circumstances, like, say, taking down a enemy that's flying with a jetpack, but it just doesn't do that much damage to be much more useful than the lightsaber, and because of the fact that the saber part of this stance is limited, yet I think it's a net loss. And the other one is just, like I said, it's the same con as the first one, but your saber effectiveness is limited. So this one is only effective, or can only be effective, if you plan on utilizing the blaster at least as much as the saber. Or I would say at the bare minimum, a 40-60 split. So if you're someone who wants to fight with the lightsaber all the time and only, like, occasionally uses the blaster, then the blaster stance is not going to work for you because the saber combat is so limited. But that's just all the basic information. So let's take a look at the skill tree for this stance. So as far as the skills go for the blaster stance, there's only 7 of them, so it's actually less than most of the skill trees in this game. But what exists are pretty important. Now, there are certain ones that are probably more important than others, but like I always say in these videos, if you're going to emphasize a stance, if it's going to be your primary, then I recommend getting all of the skill points because that's how you make the stance as effective as possible. So the first one is the flying lunge, which says hold X to close the distance to your enemy with the leaping thrust. And that's what it looks like. So it's a great way to close the distance, and it's important for this stance because, like I said, if you're using it effectively, you're using that blaster at range, you know, you're using it out at a distance. But if you need to close the gap, whether it's just to fill up your ammo or because you need to do some saber damage, then this is a very useful attack for doing that. The next one, going right up the middle, is efficient heat transfer. This one is pretty important just because it reduces the time required to fully charge your blaster shot. So when you're using the blaster, you have a basic shot, but you also can charge for a significantly more powerful shot. Efficient heat transfer just makes it quicker to charge that, so it's obviously a useful skill if you're using the blaster. The next one is point blank, and this is probably my favorite blaster thing at all. It can be complicated to use just because the timing is so specific, but it's a very cool ability. So if you press Y just before an enemy hits, you blast them away with your blaster. So it kind of replaces parrying, but obviously a lot more effective because it deals a ridiculously powerful shot that will actually one-shot a lot of the enemies in the game. So like I said, the reason I say that it can be difficult is because the window for using point blank as a parry is the smallest parry window out of any form in any difficulty in the game. You have to hit it at exactly the right time for it to work. But if you do, like I said, it's got a really cool animation, and you one-shot a lot of enemy types. And if you don't one-shot them, you obviously do a ton of damage. Finally, up at the top, we have Quick Draw, which is basically Star Wars Jedi Survivor's version of Deadeye from Red Dead Redemption. So you hold it, and you're able to target multiple enemies and then blast them. You do that by holding LB and then Y. So the problem with this one, or I should say there's a couple problems with this skill that kind of make it so I almost never use it. One of which is it's really easy to interrupt, so it really only works if you use it to open combat, before the enemies start attacking you, because it does not it slows down a little bit, like it slows the game down a little bit, but not as much as Deadeye does. So as soon as they stagger you out of that, you can't actually complete the attack, but it still uses your force on the front end, so it's definitely something that I don't recommend doing unless you know you can succeed. The other problem is you can't actually target the same target, you can't target the same enemy more than once with this one. So if you're fighting against a larger opponent that you want to do a bunch of damage to, it's not like you can just spam 6 shots on the same enemy. It's 1 shot per enemy. So like I said, it's fun to use, it's very flashy and cool, but there's a lot of situations where it is not smart to use Quick Draw. If we look over at our side abilities, we have the first one is Blaster Cooldown. This one's not a special ability, it just makes it so you refill ammo faster. So with the Blaster Stance, you don't just have unlimited ammo or a ammunition magazine, you actually have to deal damage with your lightsaber to get more ammo. So it's an annoying feature of the stance, but I assume they do that just so you don't sit at a distance and spam blaster bolts. But this one just makes it so it takes less lightsaber strikes to fill your ammo back up, so it's certainly useful for that. Improved clip, I wish it said improved magazine, but we'll stick with clip. Increase maximum blaster ammunition by 3, so this one just gives you more ammo that you can stock up before you start to use it, so also just another way to make the blaster quite a bit more useful. And finally, we have Energizing Flurry. This one is a special move, and so it says hold LB and press X to perform a sequence of quick swings that rapidly replenishes ammunition if they connect. This one, in theory, would be really useful because you could rapidly, restore a whole bunch of ammo all quickly. There's a lot of problems with it though. One, it does almost no damage, which annoys me considering you're stabbing someone with a lightsaber. That should be a kill shot on anyone not wearing Beskar, but this one just does almost nothing, and it's almost impossible to actually land all of those hits on the same target because the target tracking or auto aim or whatever you want to call it on this move absolutely sucks. Typically when I've tried using it, you maybe connect once, usually no times, and like I said, it does almost no damage. So Energizing Flurry in theory should be very useful for this for this stance, but it's not. And so that's the skill tree, all pretty straightforward, I should say. None of those are really wild and crazy. As far as stances, because like I always say in these videos, you get 2 stances, not just one, and you usually want to pick a complementary stance so that way you kind of fill in for the weak points of the stance that you want your primary one to be. And so the 2 complementary stances for this one are the single saber stance and the double-bladed saber stance. So we'll start with the single-bladed saber stance because that's the one that I choose to go with when I main hand the blaster stance. And I choose it for a lot of reasons, one of which just being because it's probably my favorite stance overall and the most adaptable, but the other one is, for this one specifically, is because it's very good. So, the blaster stance's main advantages come from long range. It's the only one where you can blast people from a distance. And obviously for that, pretty useful. You don't have to get anywhere near your enemies. But that being said, up close, like I said, your saber abilities are super limited. So that's one of the reasons why the single saber stance is a really good complement, because the single saber is very, very good up close, and unlike a lot of the other stances in the game, it has no weaknesses. It's good against one enemy, it's good against multiple enemies, it's good against basic mob enemies like these, and it's good against boss enemies. So like I said, because of the fact that there's no weaknesses to the single saber stance, and because it's the natural extension being part of the blaster stance, I think it makes the best complementary stance for the blaster stance. That being said, the other option is the double-bladed stance, and this one kind of does the same sort of thing. So it fills in for your weaknesses up close. The double-bladed saber is the best one against groups, but it is also weaker against single opponents, so that's why I put the single saber over top of the blaster stance. But that being said, it's fast-paced, up-close damage, still still does a lot to fill in for the weaknesses of the blaster stance, so that's why the double-bladed stance also works. As far as perks to go with the blaster stance, the ones that I recommend are, first of all, the marksmanship one. This one increases your blaster damage, so it says when in blaster stance, Cal's blaster shots do more damage. This one's obvious, there's no downsides, it just makes your gun more effective, so obviously if you're going to use the blaster stance, the marksmanship perk is obvious. The next one is ambidexterity, so this one's increases damage, and it says shooting targets temporarily increases lightsaber damage. So this one makes another one that just is obvious for the blaster stance, because every single time you shoot someone with it, the next time you use your lightsaber, it's going to be increased. So you're going to get more damage out of your lightsaber for using your blaster. So again, no downsides to this one, just obviously benefits the blaster stance. The next one I recommend is recuperation. And now this one is optional, but I think it works really well with the stance because it says the minimum level that your force meter automatically regenerates to is increased. So I find that out of all of the stances that I use the force the least with the blaster stance, probably because I'm using the blaster instead of the force. And so because of that, recuperation is actually more effective here because it makes sure that when you do get around to needing to use the force, recuperation has helped it regenerate to a better level. So I find that more than any other stance, the blaster stance benefits from recuperation the most. And finally, unflinching is important for this one. So it says no interruption. It just means absorb one hit when charging the blaster without being interrupted. So the reason I like this one is because if you're using something like the quick draw one, or just trying to charge up a shot to blast someone with, that can be interrupted really easily by either being shot by an enemy or hit or kicked or anything like that. And you don't want to do that because it really, really disrupts the effectiveness of your blaster stance. So that's why I think unflinching is very important for this one, because those animations for firing and all that sort of stuff charging up can be pretty long. So I think unflinching is also a pretty obvious choice. And so those are all of the perks that I recommend for the blaster stance. But that is all that there is to say about the blaster stance. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful, but that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.